And we continue this discussion, what's been happening at Sascoc, with sports lawyer David Becker, who was involved in cases with Sascoc. Very good to have you with us. I'm just wondering if you were listening to what Barry Hendricks had to say about how they are turning things around, cleaning out the rot. Do you believe that's happening?
Thanks for having me on the show, Jane. Yes, it was very interesting to hear Barry's comments, in particular about taking accountability. As you mentioned, I was involved in giving evidence before the Zulman inquiry relating to a particular sport known as Sascoc, which was the South African Sport and Fitness Federation. And that followed a 73-page report by an advocate Pullinger into various allegations or various misconduct on the part of the organisation Sascoc. So I was giving evidence about that report because 3.5 years ago, an independent advocate known as Advocate Pullinger, he filed a report which made a number of very, very serious findings against the sport called Sascoc. And Sascoc is responsible for fitness, aerobics and hip-hop in South Africa. And those reports, those findings by Advocate Pullinger were very, very damning indeed.
All right. And where are we today as far as that's concerned? I mean, if Sascoc is cleaning itself up, as Barry said, will this be resolved?
Well, we hope so. That report was filed 3.5 years ago by Advocate Pullinger, and just to be clear, the findings were very unequivocal. The findings were that there was an intimidation of minors within the sport concerned, there was a maladministration of funding, there was a maladministration in the awarding of Protea colours, discrimination, manipulation of scoring, so very, very serious findings. And the report was submitted to Sascoc 3.5 years ago, and absolutely nothing was done about it. It sat with Mr. Sam, and we were advised by people within Sascoc that he was dealing with the matter personally, and absolutely nothing happened. This was 3.5 years ago, and to this day, we're now still waiting. The matter was since referred to the Minister of Sport and was actually included in the Zulman Commission, the Zulman inquiry, and I gave evidence on this before the Zulman panel, but we're still waiting 3.5 years later. Absolutely nothing has been done. And you know, when you have a 73-page report by an independent advocate
and not do anything about it?
Yes, it's a very good question. I mean, you know, as a parent who has children who participate in sport, when you have an independent report which says that there's intimidation of minors within the sport, which says that there's a maladministration of funding within sport, I mean, these are very, very serious matters. Your eyebrows should be raised, your skin begins to crawl when you hear about those kind of things, and yet nothing was done about these findings for 3.5 years. And there really needs to be accountability. So Mr. Hendricks spoke about accountability. There wasn't accountability then, 3.5 years ago. There hasn't been since then. So if there's going to be accountability now, we certainly need to see that. And these recommendations by Advocate Pullinger need to be implemented absolutely immediately.
Because it seems as though these federations are operating outside of the Sascoc orbit.
Yes, well, you know, Sascoc, one of their functions is to ensure good governance amongst the various sporting bodies. And unfortunately, their record has been very poor. There's been poor governance, and they've been poor in driving forward good governance within the sports. And of course, if you don't have good governance in your sporting organizations, then you don't have good administration. So the real issue really is one of governance, and Sascoc needs to do a much better job of ensuring that the sporting federations have good governance structures in place. And Mr. Hendricks spoke about accountability going forward. They really need to hold themselves accountable for doing nothing when they had a 73-page report which was scathing, and they also need to hold themselves accountable going forward in how they deal with these matters.
And is there anything that we can do, the public, the government, to hold them accountable?
Yes, exactly. And it's, in a way, it's quite sad that we've had to resort to this Zulman inquiry now to deal with all these allegations against Sascoc. Really, a lot should have been done earlier. And when you think about a report that sits there at Sascoc with all these office bearers and nothing is done, a scathing report, you know, a lot of questions need to be asked and answered there.
And David, I mean, ultimately, the knock-on effect, obviously those athletes who were abused, that's horrific, but on our sport and our opportunities for these sportsmen and women, what sort of impact is it having on them? Yes, obviously the opportunities to participate in sport are absolutely crucial in our country. But to do so fairly and within good governance structures, that's in fact a right that they have, all athletes. And this case actually arose out of a Dr. van Rensburg who lives in Cape Town, and his two daughters participated in the sport of fitness, aerobics and hip-hop.
And he's driven forward this case over 6 years. 6 years ago, he launched these complaints. They were not dealt with. And here we are sitting 6 years later, and still nothing has been done about it. So it's a message that goes out to athletes and to parents. You know, make sure that your complaints are heard, and hold Sascoc accountable. They need to be held accountable going forward.
And we've got to keep this in our vision, clearly. David Becker, good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Our police officers are killing themselves. Are we taking responsibility for their mental health? That story up next.